Hi everyone, this is Anna from Camellia Fiber Company. Welcome back. As a reminder, we have cast on 15 stitches here on my needle, and today we're actually going to be learning how to do the knit stitch. Once we have these stitches cast on, I'm holding this needle in my right hand. I'm going to transition it to holding it in my left hand and pick up my other needle. And this empty needle is what I'm going to be knitting onto. One important thing to note here is that I'm going to be holding my working yarn in my left hand. This is a style of knitting called Continental knitting, and it's not quite as common here in the US. Typically you'll see people holding their yarn in their right hand. And this is not my natural style, so I'm a little bit awkward and clumsy at it. But when you hold your yarn in your right hand, this is a style called English knitting. Neither way is right or wrong. People just have a personal preference. The only reason I knit Continental is because I learned to crochet before I learned to knit, and crocheters typically hold their yarn in their left hand, so this was something I was already used to. Some people think that Continental knitting is faster. It requires you to move your hands a little bit less, so some people also think that it is a little bit easier on your hands, but again, neither is right or wrong. This is just the way that I knit and that I'll be showing you. So let's get into how we actually hold our yarn. This can be, in addition to casting on, one of the more complicated things to figure out as a knitter. So when I pick up my yarn in my left hand, I'm gonna wrap one loop around my pinky. So I'll show you that again. I'm taking my pinky, looping it around, so I have this loop around my pinky. And then I'm gonna bring my hand forward and loop around my forefinger. So I've got a loop around my pinky and a loop around my forefinger. My forefinger is going to be what lets me hold my tension on my yarn, which is going to be really important as we knit. If it's too loose, then your stitches are going to be a little bit all over the place. And if it's too tight, then it's going to be really tight and scrunched together, and that's not something that you want. So I've got a loop on my pinky, loop on my forefinger, and now I am ready to knit. So I have my empty needle in my right hand. And what I'm going to do with this empty needle is take my first stitch, and I'm going to go from front to back, just like this, and then take this yarn around my forefinger and throw it over the front of that needle. This needle's job is now to just take this loop that I've made and pull it through the loop on my left stitch. So I'm going to take this, pull it through, and I now have a stitch on my right hand needle. This is my new stitch, so I can now drop this stitch on my left needle totally off that needle, and I now have my first knit stitch on my right hand needle. So that is the knit stitch. We're just going to do that a couple more times now. I'm going to take my right hand needle, go from front to back into the first stitch on my left needle, wrap the yarn on my hand around that needle, and then use that needle to pull it through the loop. And I'm going to drop that off my left needle. So now I have two knit stitches. Let's do a third. I take my right hand needle, go from front to back into the loop on my left needle, wrap this yarn over the right needle, and then use that needle to pull that loop through. Once you've pulled it through, you can drop this stitch off your left needle. And that is the knit stitch. As you practice, you'll be able to get a little bit faster. It'll look something like this. And you can go ahead and knit across that entire first row. So again, I have 15 stitches. If your pattern calls for something else, just knit across that entire first row, and then I will show you how to turn around and go the other direction. So I've knit across the first row. I have 15 knit stitches. You'll notice if you look closely, if you pull down your cast on edge, these knit stitches that you've made have made a little V like this. And that shape is what a knit stitch looks like. On the back of the needle, if you turn over, you'll notice that instead of those V's, you have these little bumps. These bumps we call purl bumps, and when we learn to purl, this is the actual stitch that we're going to be making. For now, let's just turn around and work the other direction. So I'm working flat. I'm going to turn my needle over and now work back this direction. I'm going to pull my yarn behind, loop it around my pinky and my forefinger, take my now empty right hand needle and just knit across this way. So go from front to back into that first loop, pull this yarn over the needle in the back, and then use this needle to pull that loop through. And there's my knit stitch. I'm going to drop it off. And we're just going to do that all the way across this other side. So going through that loop from front to back, draping this yarn over that needle in the back, and then using that needle to pull it through, and pulling that loop off the left-hand needle. So we'll do that all the way across. Take as much time as you need to practice this and get comfortable with it. One of the difficult things is just getting used to holding the yarn and the needles. So it will feel a little bit clumsy at first, but again, just rip out and go back as many times as you need to get comfortable with this. And there are our 2 rows of knit stitches. You'll notice this time that my knit stitches that I made are on the back of my work since I was working the other direction. So when I turn this over to the front, I now have these purl bumps on the front of my work. This alternating pattern of a knit stitch and then a purl bump is called garter stitch. I've gone ahead and knitted a few more rows here, and you can see a little more clearly now what this garter stitch looks like. I've got my alternating knit and purl rows. The knit stitches are a little bit buried in the purl rows here, but this alternating knit and purl is the texture that is created by garter stitch, which is just a product of knitting every single row when you're knitting flat. I would encourage you to go ahead and go knit 5, 10, or 20, however many more rows that you need to till you feel a little more comfortable with this. Once you've done that, you will be ready to move on to purl stitch, which is what we're going to be covering in our next video. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you found this video helpful, make sure you like and subscribe, and tune in for our next video. Thank you.